you for having Cole and I, because we are pretty passionate about what we have here to share with all of you, and then also we're pretty passionate about ensuring we don't waste a minute of your time. So let me see if I can share here and get this set of slides that we're going to be using to kind of guide the conversation up here. All right, can we all see that? Claire, yeah?
Yes.
You're my guy. You tell me yes. Okay, cool. All right. So Stephen and I go way back, and he didn't add any of the details about the cold beers we were drinking in San Francisco, but maybe that's his business. But I just shared that, so I'm just going to go ahead and disclose that, Stephen, if that's okay. And we have talked about every topic you can name, specifically about, and also with the Notion portfolio. I'm a big fan because they are truly a group of people that don't waste time. And that's really the theme of today. Because when Stephen asked, why in the heck would you go back and take one of the harder jobs, right? Most of you are CEOs, and you're bound by the CEO rule of law to beat the crap out of your CMOs, right? And I was a CMO, and I took some good thrashings, but I stood in the pocket there with my co-CEOs at Celonis, and we went to war in a very controlled industry run by SAP and Oracle. And we did learn a lot, but specifically, Stephen asked me, what did we learn, or what did I learn? And the biggest lesson, and I think I can apply this, it's universally applied. It doesn't matter if you're a seed stage or a unicorn, is the lesson I learned from one of my mentors there is there's always enough time to raise money, but there's never enough time to raise time. You can't waste time. And I came in with a lot of bias from the book, and I love my book very much. It's right behind Anthony Bourdain there. And I think there was a lot of theoretical things in there that made a complete sense, and I still believe in wholeheartedly. But there's also a lot of lessons learned about what really worked in the trenches. And that's where I wanted to spend some time with all of you, because what we're going to share today is the one thing that I think has no downside around storytelling and controlling your narrative over time. And every company, I don't care if you're a pizza joint in New York City or a $1 billion value plus company or a decacorn, these rules apply to everybody. There's another sidetrack. If we can get to this at the end of the session, Stephen asked me why there's a cat on my website. And so my company is called Lake Marie. I got a logo of my cat. His name's Charlie. I'll explain that later because I don't want to digress into that rabbit hole at this point in time. So let's go. What did we learn? So one of the things that, I stand here hand on heart with the best storyteller that I know, and that's Cole, is that there's a universal truth in all businesses, and it doesn't matter if you're consumer or B2B or B2B2C or literally retail. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're always going to have a story told about you. And I was just in New York, Cole's in New York. We'll walk down the street in New York, you see pizza joints, you see restaurants, you see little mom and pop shops. They all have stories told about them. And all of you here, just by founding your own company or being a CEO, there's a story told about you. You could be the one telling it, or your investors, or the media, or the press, or the analysts. The second universal truth is you will or will not be in control of your story. And the more popular you are, the less chances you will be in control of that story, right? Because people like to, twist it and turn it and morph it into things that are true or not true. And so that's one of the components we want to talk about today, because I think it's your, right as an entrepreneur CEO to not only create your story, but control it over time. And one of the things that the big aha that I had sitting in the CMO seat, and we were a pretty popular company. It was 2.5 billion in value when we joined. It was 13 billion when I exited, and I'm still an advisor to the company. And one of the things that was very clear, and all this stuff sort of happened while I was there, right? That the world hates a stable story. It despises it. It will tempt you to change your story and a narrative on a weekly basis, if not a monthly basis, if not a quarterly basis, because pandemics, the war in Europe, recession, AI. This is my first joke, everybody. Get ready to laugh. Elections, bank failures, more AI. Say I'm trying really hard. But these things lure us to like reset the narrative. And I was in that world. Cole gave me some advice that he told me I was chasing the dragon, not hunting it, because we were coming in with a really strong point of view around how, and I'll explain a little more about what Solonis does if you haven't heard of them, but how there's a lot of value lurking inside of businesses that you just can't see. And yet that was the core story, the story that founded Solonis. But yet, depending on the topic that hit us, supply chain breakdowns, you name it, the tendency was to shift the narrative. And that creates a lot of, you could call it anything, fragmentation. I call it bleed out, because you end up in, you're mostly here are CEOs, founders, or sitting close to the founder. This is why there's always a new deck every week, a new website every quarter, new enablement that goes stale before you even finish it, right? And the bigger you get, the more costly that is, right? We were enabling 2,000 sales reps every 6 months, and by the time they were enabled, we changed the story. Not complete and wholeheartedly, but it shifted to the point where they didn't know what to say. And so, of course, they just go grab the sales deck from 3 years ago and use that, right? And so this kind of never-ending cycle is expensive. It doesn't cost you as much when you're a seed company, but it costs you a lot at Series B, C, D, and E, a lot. And while we are trying to grab a hold of all these relevant influences in our business, the original inspirational story of why you started the company remains the same. And people love those stories. They're usually this origin story is what they root for, right? That's why they're like, yeah, go get them. And that was the aha moment. In our story, Dave and Cole, we teamed up at this moment in time. It was 2021. I was on a Solonis World Tour. I was asked to go speak in front of a bunch of manufacturing companies about this German company they had never heard of. And by the way, I digress a little bit. Stephen and I talk a lot about this sort of mental mode of like, hey, can I be a global superforce? Can I own an agenda worldwide if I'm bound to, if I started my company in Lisbon, or if I started in Brussels, or if I started in Prague, or if I started in Germany, or if I started in Israel, or there a natural boundary around my business? I am extremely biased because I work for Mercury Interactive and we were a worldwide leader, and I was a CMO and still advisor to Solonis, and we're a worldwide leader. And this whole notion of storytelling has no boundaries tied to it. People will root for you, and they don't care where you're from if the story is strong enough. But on the Solonis World Tour, I was about ready to step in front of, and this is why I called Cole. I was like, I don't get nervous much, but I knew I was screwed. I was about ready to go step in front of 250 manufacturing companies. No bullshit. I grew up in Iowa, which is a state that you probably may never see in your life. And it was full of manufacturing companies. I grew up on a farm, and I realized I had to speak like a human being, not like a technologist. And we had this whole deck loaded up around really impressive technology topics like data-driven execution and data insights and action and execution management systems and applying AI and washing it through your data to give you insights and answers you never knew you had, all this stuff. And I realized if I said any of this to this crowd, not only would they shut off in the first 3 minutes, they would probably find an excuse to leave. And so we decided to change the story to the origin. And we went back, and I'm not going to go super deep here, but there was a couple of problems that Solonis solved really well. And one of them is that we could find process problems that companies could not see in their business. And we decided to lead in this session and say, hey, we're sitting here in front of 250 of the best manufacturing companies in the Midwest. And Solonis actually has worked with 350 manufacturing companies throughout Germany, DACH region, and throughout EMEA. And all 350 companies, all 350 manufacturing companies had two things in common. And the crowd was kind of pausing, waiting for whatever I was going to say next. And I said, the first thing they had in common was they all double paid their invoices. The crowd was like, what? I was like, yeah. So they, just to define what double pay means, they received one invoice and they paid it twice, which CFOs hate. And the second thing they had in common is none of them knew they were doing it. And that's the problem that Celonis solves. And now, after this, you're going to hear 45 minutes of great discussions around the technology and the process mining technology you may never heard of. You're going to see demos of the magic that these guys figured out on how to X-ray SAP and Oracle to find out if you're double paying invoices. And by the way, there's another thing they had in common. They were shipping products and they weren't invoicing for that product for years later. And these are 10, 100 billion dollar problems. 10 million, 100 million, billion dollar problems. And there's all this stuff lurking inside a business. And these guys, these three guys out of college in Germany, figured out a way to X-ray SAP, Oracle, and all the systems of record to tell you if you're doing things like this. And if you're interested in that, you should stick around for the next 45 minutes or 50 minutes. And I sat the mic down. The next thing that happened is, and I don't know if, I think there's a few companies in Germany, and I've been to Munich. I'm a VIP at the Andes in Munich. And but getting a compliment from one of my co-CEOs was like an act of, it was like a divine intervention. Impossible, right? And one of my co-CEOs, I won't name who it was, said, "Hey, this new storytelling technique is really powerful and I love it. In fact, I don't have to demo in meetings anymore." I should have just left right there, because that is, no CMO ever hears those kind of words from their CEO. And that's when I knew that we had something. That's when I knew we could retain the original origin story at Celonis and still apply it to all of the big ticket items that were floating across and influencing our customer buying cycles. We didn't have to become a supply chain a supply chain company just because we fixed supply chain problems. We could hook into it with that story. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you do that. So this is the inspiration. This is the inspiration for what Cole and I call storytelling and narrative control. Because every single company has the right to not only create their story, but control their story. And that is the problem we solve. And for some reason, and I think it just is the cyclical nature of messaging and positioning and marketing, we're in the state now, if it can't be measured or clicked on, it's no good. Or we throw it out. Or we feel that it's so easy to change our message that there's no real evidence that hurts us or helps us. And I really truly believe, and I spend all my days talking to Stephen about this and working with Cole and helping companies get back to what got us here. Get back to the story, that the reason why you opened your first, the reason why you hung up your first shingle, the reason why you hired your first employee, and also hook into all of the relevant industry issues that are driving your business forward. And so we have this notion of this process we call narrative control, and it's the ability to command control of a conversation of your choosing. And that allows you to become synonymous with things. You could be synonymous with a microeconomic issues. Celonis is very synonymous, or becoming very synonymous with supply chain issues. Or you could be, hook into a new technology trend. We all have AI on our websites, whether we have AI or not. You could build categories, which I spent 10, 15 years, depending on how you count it. And these topics are critical, but it doesn't necessarily define the story about your business. And the trick is, how do you hook into these trends and influences in your business while maintaining the integrity of the story that got you here? And you can do both. And your marketer is going to love you if you took any notes on this, because you don't have to change the website every quarter. And you two might get along, because there is a way of sticking with what, the inspiration and the aha moment that inspired your company, and also hook into all the trends that matter. So I'm going to hand things off to Cole real quickly. And Cole's going to walk you through some of the thoughts around how the first step matters. And the first step's obviously starting with your story. And then after Cole's finished, I'm going to swing back and talk about some of the lessons I learned around controlling your story. And I'll use some examples from my days at Celonis. So Cole, I'm going to hand things to you. I'll drive. That's all right with you?
I'd love it.
Um, and, I'll keep rolling here. Here we go.
Yeah. So let's back up a slide, Dave. Um, so yeah, so something I think about like with storytelling a lot is great writers are able to tell a story around a feeling or a thought or a lesson that all of a sudden we remember forever. And then other times people can try to give you the same lesson and it just like goes over your head. One story is like I think we've all heard of placebo and how placebo works, and people say like the power of placebo, and that never really registered with me a ton until I read this story in this really wonderful book called Alchemy about this judge who went to this bar and drank 7 gin and tonics at this bar and decides to drive home afterwards, which was a really bad decision. And he gets pulled over by a police officer, and the police officer has him get out of the car, and he breathalyzes him. And the judge is like, "Man, I'm screwed here. I'm gonna go to prison." And he blows under the limit. Like it showed that he had just had like one cocktail. So the judge turns the car around, goes back to the bar, and gives the bartender an earful because he realized that the bartender was giving him faulty gin and tonics. And so bartenders with kind of a rickety moral compass will give you a full strength gin and tonic, and then after that they'll wash the glass out with gin, throw some ice in there, throw some soda water, some lime, and unless you have a palate like Wolfgang Puck, you're not really going to be able to differentiate between the fake gin and tonic and the real gin and tonic. But your body will still behave in the same way as if you had been drinking. So, like researchers have actually seen where these people who have maybe had the placebo of alcohol, thinking they've actually drank it, but they haven't. Their speech will slur a little bit. Their motion, they'll behave like an inebriated person. I mean, when I read that story, it kind of clicked. Like, wow, I didn't know how powerful placebo was until they shared that story with me. And if you all are anything like me, after hearing that story, now when you hear the word placebo, all of a sudden that story is going to immediately come to mind, and you probably have like a different feeling around placebo now. And so I think that's just one example of where storytelling can be used to really help you understand terms that maybe you would just like look past on a day-to-day basis, and go ahead and move forward. And somebody who is an expert at telling stories is Leo Tolstoy, and one of his great quotes is, "All great literature is one of two stories: a man goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town." Next slide. And I think what's important to understand is that your customer is the individual on the journey, and you are the stranger that has come to town. And Dave and I like to use this funny little graphic. You're the cowboy. The problem is the chicken that's wreaking havoc on the poor, on this poor Western town, and the customer is the scared person, kind of in the corner there, clasping his stomach out of just pure fear. Um, but yeah, so keep going, Dave. But yeah, I think like people love stories, and we can see this in films, right? So like some examples are Star Wars, right? Where you have Luke Skywalker, and he's the customer, and all of a sudden somebody comes to town, and now he's on this amazing journey to fight against evil that's spreading across the universe. Then of course you have like the Matrix, that moment where he's offered the red pill or the blue pill. And then we can't forget about like Lord of the Rings with Gandalf showing up at the Hobbit's house, and next thing we know, Frodo is on this amazing journey all across Middle Earth, trying to defeat evil. And I know that like sometimes storytelling looked through that lens can feel a little bit corny, but uh, Lord of the Rings has made more money than some of the biggest companies in the world, and it just goes to show that like storytelling is really, really deeply powerful. Dune is another example, right, where Paul Atreides has landed on this desert island, and he suddenly gets thrown into this amazing journey, and it's developed like a cult following. Go ahead, Dave. So what's the formula look like in a business setting? So kind of like getting away from films and books and stuff. This is kind of the formula that Dave and I like to practice. Um, so first, we like to start with a problem, and then you kind of couple that problem with the product, a topic, a trend, a category, some kind of movement that's taking place at the moment, and then of course like your answer to that problem. And next thing you know, you have your story. And some examples of this. Well, first I want to talk about the hero's journey. So everything we discussed previously, kind of that hero arc where you go from being like an ordinary person, and then next thing you know, you're extraordinary. Like that hero's journey kind of happens in pretty much every great film, book. And I think like companies do that really well. They're really, really aware of the hero's journey, and they're also aware of this sage advice by David Ogilvy. In this next slide, Dave, you cannot bore people into buying your product. You can only interest them in buying it. That's something I try to practice anytime I sit down to write copy. So not just like the narrative work that Dave and I are talking about, but if a client hires me to write a sales email, my thought is like, how can I make this the most entertaining email that they open up all day? Because if I can entertain them, all of a sudden they're going to send that email to their 10 closest friends. And I'll show you a little bit of my work where I've done that with some other clients here in a moment. But first, let's kind of look at some examples of brands using this kind of narrative control. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing too, if you the hero's journey, and it's something I would, yeah, let me even digress. Let me go backwards a little bit, because I did warn Stephen and Claire some of the things we're going to say. Yeah, okay, I got it. I don't know if you've heard it before, but I guess Stephen was asking me, it's like, but why are you so passionate about it, right? Why aren't you talking about category design or play bigger, all these things? And at the essence of even that Play Bigger book, the whole thing was built around a point of view on a topic. And the topic in the book was about category, but you could have a topic that's not bound to category. It could be customer, it could be product, it could be a technology trend. And the one thing that the masters do is always tell you where you're going, or where you are, where you're going, and where you've been. And Stephen, I was just on your website where Chris came out and was talking about the power of funding stages, right? And let everybody know where you're at. It's an example. It's a perfect proxy of the hero's journey. It's through financial terms: size, growth, speed, penetration into a market. And if there's one thing that as a CEO, co-founder, or founder, or marketer, or anybody in your business that's kind of on the tip of the spear here, is people want to know the arc. They want to know, are we starting? Are we in the abyss? Did we get killed and reborn? Are we close to the apex? Are we about ready to get pay dirt and go home? And you can always rely on that. And if you even go to like, and I'm going to hype on a little more about this because it's so critical to just good, powerful control. If you think about all those earnings calls we listen to, the masters say, okay, if you remember where we were last, and they go back, and we remember what we said about prosecuting this particular strategy. Well, since we talked last, we acquired two companies, and that was bound to the strategy that we introduced on the last conference call. And now let me tell you about these two companies. They always bring you along, right? And we put a picture of one of our favorite companies here. Does anybody know what that picture is? Whose website did we steal it from? It's SpaceX. And so if you want to know how we're going to get to Mars and back, you can go to SpaceX's website and they'll tell you how we're going to get there. And it's all illustrated. So it's a guide to getting to Mars and back. So I digress a little bit. But if you remembered one thing from this hour we're going to spend together, grab that hero's journey and own it, because you are the person at the top and you have to tell people where you're at. And it does not, there's no downside, and it will never fail your business. and there's no risk in letting everybody know where you're at. So sorry, Cole, I just want to interject on that one a little bit because that's just absolutely critical to the bones of all storytelling. And we didn't invent that. I think you could either give, you know, probably Shakespeare probably gets some credit somewhere along the way. So anyway, all right, back to you, Cole.
Yeah, let's jump ahead to the Rolling Stones. Yeah, Stone. Go ahead and jump to that ad, that next slide. I love this example. The Rolling Stone a while ago, years ago, I think this was in the 70s, they were having some issues with landing brand sponsorships and advertisements within their magazine. And the problem was that advertisers thought that most of the customer base with the Rolling Stone was the individual on the left that kind of looks like Jesus, where it's this festival goer that probably has done way too much LSD and lives out of a van and has no money to his name. So naturally, that the advertisers didn't really think that their money would go very far if they were advertising like some new car or whatever. They didn't think that the customer base could afford it. But what the Rolling Stone found was that their readers were actually making a lot more money than advertisers assumed. And so they use narrative control to kind of change the narrative where, hey, I know like your perception is that the Rolling Stone reader is this broke hippie. The reality is that like the Rolling Stone reader is an individual in their early 30s who, makes $40,000 or $50,000 a year. Keep in mind, this was like the 80s, I think. And is well educated and is a great customer. And so it ended up like really changing the perception of Rolling Stone, and with it like brought in a lot more advertisers. Another example is Pilot. This is another B2B ad here, but from the outside looking in, it looks a little bit simple, right? Like you didn't start a startup to do bookkeeping, but we did build your business. We got your books. I think there's a lot more going on under the surface here that I appreciate. And that's because like Pilot is basically saying, without saying this, think about like how passionate you are about your startup. That's how passionate we are about our startup, which is Pilot. And let us handle the thing that we're really passionate about so that you can handle the thing that you're really passionate about. Another example is some vintage advertising that Apple did. I just thought that this was really brilliant. This was for a personal computer, so I guess it's technically more of a B2C example, but I think in reality, like they were probably making this advertisement to, they were directing it more towards like creative teams within organizations. So I really love this ad. And then the next one is McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill here was actually just trying to explain to companies how important it is to not just like try to do cold sales. And so they created this image of like this really angry looking boss, and then had a series of lines following it that basically were just like all his reservations from doing work with someone trying to sell them. And then at the bottom it says, moral sales and sales in before your salesmen call, because I've changed the buying process. And so I thought that this was pretty brilliant too. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own work. This is a B2C example, but Last Crumb is a company that sells $15 cookies. A box of cookies costs like $150. And they hit me up before they even had cookies. And they were like, we want to sell cookies for like $15 a piece. And we need a really, really strong story around it. And so one thing that I did is I immediately did a bunch of research on as many cookie companies as I could. And something I found is that Famous Amos and Keebler's and Oreo and Grandma's cookies and blah, 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 animal crackers, they all sound exactly the same. If you were to remove the branding and any indication that they were owned by a particular company and read the copy, it'd be very, very difficult to differentiate between one brand and another. Another example of an industry that does this is like the bed in a box mattress industry. If you were to remove like colors, branding, names from Casper and Yoga Mattress and Avocado Mattress and all the dozens of mattress companies out there, and you were to read their copy, they all sound exactly the same. Every single industry, I don't care what industry you're in, this sort of anomaly happens where the top players in the space will all copy each other's voices, and next thing you know, you kind of have like the same voice in an industry. And something that Dave and I will often do is we just try to run as far as we can in the opposite direction. So when I was doing this work with Last Crumb, I said, well, if all these cookie companies are like catered towards like a family oriented customer base, we're just going to get as dirty as we possibly can without getting in too much trouble. So we renamed the cookies to like Netflix and Crunch, the James Dean, the chocolate chip cookie was I named the Better Than Sex cookie. The red velvet cookie we named the What the Fuck Velvet cookie. And instead of like describing the cookies in the standard like, oh, these cookies are like ooey gooey and the chocolate is like delicious or whatever, there's no mention in the product descriptions of the actual ingredients in the cookie. So it's all narrative based. So like for example, the James Dean cookie is actually like a story that a fictional story that I made up about this young kid living in Illinois getting dumped by the hottest girl in the school, and she goes after the quarterback, and so he goes to this diner and drinks a Oreo milkshake to feel better about himself. And years later, he turns into James Dean. And so we just came up with these ridiculous stories. But it went viral. Like people, Last Premise developed just a cult following, and a lot of it is because the descriptions read nothing like any other cookie out there. It's developed a voice that reads nothing like any other brand out there. And I think this is something we try to replicate in any company we work with, whether it's accounting software, or a cookie brand, because I think that it's very, very possible. The brands just have to be willing to get a little out there. You don't have to necessarily say the word fuck to get out there, but you definitely have to be willing to get a little bold. So yeah, now I'm going to hand it over to Dave to talk a little bit about his work. And yeah, I can answer questions and stuff at the end.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks. And by the way, this cookie example, Cole sent me a box of these. They're really good. I don't know, tell you the truth, if they're better or not, but I want them to be better because they're so different, right? I just want it to taste better. Probably it's the placebo effect. And Cole's like,
Yeah.
mind washing. These cookies are so damn good. And of all the examples, think about this in any of your businesses. I mean, I have a list of everybody that from CX companies to data analytics to SaaS sprawl to security observability to all aspects security, you name it. You don't have to be boring. You can start to bring your company to life using really unexpected uses of storytelling and narrative. And there's no rules. There's no rules. And I'll show you now what we did at Celonis, which did break all the rules in the enterprise. But just remember this, because I just think what you put around the product is a placebo for what might be in the product. And if the product's great and your technology is fantastic, awesome, great start. But sometimes, it takes a while to get to a great product and a fantastic technology. But a lot of people give you the benefit of the doubt if that package makes you want it to be good or want it to solve your problems. So the second part here, and I'll watch the time here real carefully for you, Claire and Stephen, but you got to protect your story with narrative control. You have to treat your story like your product, your people, because it's the one thing that influences and touches everybody. Not everybody will ever use your product. Not everybody who knows who you are will meet all your people, but they will all hear a story about you. Every single one of them. So you have to protect it. And one of the things at Celonis that was like real core to the work we were doing there, and the reason I got pulled over from Play Bigger is Celonis was my client, and we were launching a new category and bringing process mining to life, is we knew we had to make this German company that nobody ever heard of bring to life a problem that everybody was arguably worried about, and then help people understand how quickly and easily it is to find these problems inside of your business that you cannot see. And there's 50 years of SAP, and there's a lot of buried bones inside those processes. And no offense to SAP, or no offense to Oracle, or no offense to Salesforce, or no offense to NetSuite, they all have complex systems, and they all have problems. And with every problem inside of enterprise, there's money. And then these guys, these three founders, came up with this new enterprise X-ray technology called process mining. And the mandate at Celonis was to control the narrative. Because we entered a space dominated by SAP, and they did not like what we had to say, and they tried to push us and pull us off of our narrative, and we had to hold tight. And so my checklist, and you could take a picture of this, you can screenshot it, I don't care what you do with it, but my CMO checklist was the same as the CEO checklist. And if I don't care what the asset was, it could be a social posting on LinkedIn, it could have been a press release, it could have been a speech, it could have been a graphic, it could have been a blurb on our Cellosphere user conference. We asked the same question: is it boring, yes or no? And we write abstracts about our speakers that were fun. Like not just to cut and paste, but fun. Like Stephen Millard's, really, really, really fun to have a beer with. And he's also an expert on operations and growing your business at scale and speed. So we would put the cookie wrapper around our abstracts. Is it different? By not being boring, often you're different in the enterprise, and certainly in consumer is a little different. Is it intuitive? If you read it out loud to your parents or your kids, would they know what you said? This one, here's a key takeaway for anything you ever see coming out of anybody that puts something on your desk. Read it out loud and ask yourself if that's how you would say it if you weren't reading it. Is that how you talk? Because if you don't, I always told my teams, write like you talk and don't butcher the human language. And so when I say, hey, 350 companies, manufacturing companies in Europe were double paying their invoices. And the definition of double paying was you receive one invoice and pay it twice. I bet you every one of you understood what I meant. I didn't say they were all suffering from event log clogs inside of SAP and the data feed that we received that we applied artificial intelligence to, that we put a workflow on top of, revealed the fact that there was an insight that blocked up this procure to pay process. And that was where they found the problem. I didn't say that. I just said they double paid. Intuitive. Just ask yourself, that's something you would say to a friend. Is it relevant? Is it tied to a common problem that people are wrestling with? AI, supply chain, you name it. And continuity. I put this hint down there. I used to hang everything on the wall like a movie script. And I'd take the thing and I'd put it up on the wall and say, show me where it lives in the story arc. Where? Do we just introduce another Hobbit and nobody knows her name in the Lord of the Rings, and nobody knows what happened to her when she, faced the Balrog? You have to keep your story arcs intact, because people will lose track of your business if you don't. Basic stuff, but lost. That's why we said the lost art. This checklist kept me honest. I had to go back to the drawing board more times than I would ever admit, because I was either boring, not different, not intuitive, not relevant, or I broke my own story arc. So the thing that we did at Celonis that was unexpected, and it was not a technology campaign, even though we were a technology company, is we launched a challenge to the industry. It was called the 10 Million Challenge. And we said, if we cannot find $10 million trapped in your business, we will write a check for $100,000 and donate it to a nonprofit of your choice. Guaranteed. This one almost got me fired. 3 months on the job, I said, this would be a great idea, or 3 weeks into the job. Because every single time somebody would demo, they were like, oh yeah, we found 10 million bucks here, 25 million bucks here, 30 million bucks here. But let me show you the data rinsing technology that we use to factor the data and wash it with the AI to deliver the spaghetti diagram. I'm like, what happened to that 10 million? And so we launched this. By the way, we can't afford Wall Street Journal ads. So we ran it once, and everybody in our company took a picture with it. So 3,000 Selonauts, we call them surges, took a picture and put it out on LinkedIn at the exact same time. 27 million impressions for free. Control the narrative. Instead of coming up with a, hey, a walkthrough video with demos, we created our own movie. And my guys and my team and my gals on the team decided to go all Tarantino and created a mobster movie about this known as 10 million challenge. You could Google this on YouTube. And they did it over a weekend. And they hired, this guy was a beer drinking friend of a friend of mine. They went into a restaurant that one of the other guys worked at, and they shot this beautiful video that felt like a gangster movie around this 10 million hidden in your business. And we turned it into a television ad because it was so well done, and it didn't cost us anything. It was the in-house team, and not everybody has a great in-house team like that. But we went cinematic is what my point is. We created a movie because we are in a movie. And we took everything at Salonis and turned it into a movie, otherwise known as a story. We ran billboards once. We took pictures of the billboard once, and then we social searched them everywhere. I got more compliments on the the industry-wide billboard campaign that we were running when we only ran one. Placebo. We only ran one. We just took pictures of it as it was being built, and we gave updates on it on social media, and we took pictures of it. And that thing didn't cost that much because it was during COVID. It was empty. This billboard is empty. It was empty when I bought it. And so I just wanted to buy it once so I could put that up on it, take a picture of it, put it on the social media. Everything we did felt like a movie. I said, I don't want to see a world tour poster and it looks like, I want it to feel like a concert tour. Right? Because it's part of our story. We were very rock and roll, this kind of dark German company coming out to change the world. And the best indicator of does this control work on outside forces telling your story back to you in the way you want to tell it was this round of financing we did. $1 billion round of financing, went from 2.4 billion to 13 billion. And the headline says, secures another 1 billion to find and fix process problems in enterprise systems. That was on a whiteboard 3 months prior. And now it's in a TechCrunch headline. Verbatim. And there's no hubris here. Zero. But that's when I realized people were more addicted to our story than they were even the product inside the story, inside the cookie wrapper. They were rooting for us because we found stuff that nobody else could find. So the moral of our story. One, all businesses, regardless of who you are a story that unfolds over time. It's your job to tell it. It's the one thing that's free in your business. It really is. It's okay, And two, if you don't know where to start, ask yourself what I call the magic questions. In the book, they were Dave's 3 questions, but that sounds like hubris. I call them the magic questions now. What problem do you solve? What do your customers say magically changes when you solve it? And what happens if you don't solve it? If you answer these questions, you'll probably get to your story. And I'm going to give you one story about this. I worked with a CEO. Stephen's heard me tell this story a million times. And every time I sat down for a beer or on the phone or on the Zoom or when I met him live in New York, I'd always ask, hey, what problem do you solve? I won't say his name. Every single time I asked him that question, for weeks, he would give me a different answer. And about 1 or 2 months in, I said, hey, did you realize every time I ask you that question, you give me a different answer? And boy, was he pissed. He said, what do you call me, a liar? I'm like, no, I just don't think you've made up your mind. I said, so if I noticed, don't you think your people noticed? Or your customers noticed? Or your partners noticed? Or your analysts noticed? If I noticed. I said, so the one thing, the advice I gave him was get a piece of paper, write it down, fold up piece of paper, put it in your drawer, make an appointment for yourself in Google Calendar, open your drawer and take a look at it 7 days later and decide if you agree with yourself. If you don't, change the answer, stick it back in the drawer, make an appointment with yourself 2 weeks later, open the drawer, take a look at it, decide if you agree with yourself. If you do, that's probably the right answer to start with and start building your story from there. Because you have to agree with yourself as a company leader, CEO, or co-founder. Because if you don't, the world watches you. And they'll notice if you change your mind. Chapter 3, control your story. If it's a really good one, everybody's going to try to control it. They're going to try to take it from you, just like they're going to try to steal your products or your IP or your people. And if you don't, somebody else will, 100% of the time. And the more powerful your story, the more likely it is to slip out of your control. And you need to get that checklist out and tell everybody we have to control our arcs and we have to treat our business like a story or a movie. And nobody tells our story except us. And then let me go back to this cat thing I mentioned earlier. So the last thing I'm going to share, as I was with a very persnickety, very tough Israeli VC founder, love him. They're all prickly pears. I love my Israeli friends. I worked in Mercury, and I feel horrible for what's happening in Israel and Palestine on both sides of the fence. But I remember we opened up the meeting, and he's like, Dave, I can't take you seriously because you have a cat on your website. What do you have a cat on your website? And I'm like, all right, I got a question for you before I answer your question. I said, how many companies in your portfolio? So we have 250. Then I asked him this question. How many of the CEOs of that 250 companies love their website? Stephen, you know what the answer was? Zero. 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 It's like, well, I love my website because it has a picture of my cat on it.
You inspired me. We have a picture of my dog on our website now.
Yeah, it's a new
Thing.
web strategy, right? And then we started talking about our pets for like a half hour. Hey, Richard, I don't know why I'm looking at you right now, and you two talking, maybe there's only two faces I could see. We started talking about our pets for a half an hour. And you know what his face looked like? Flush with color, smile, big eyes, like all these stories. You know, I talked about my cat, Charlie Biscuits. It was just fun. And then the next half hour, he talked about his business, and his hands were like this. You know, he's like, oh, and then. So at the end of this meeting, I have one more insight for you. It's like, yeah, it's like, why do you think we had more fun talking about my cat than your business? And he's like, because I hate my story. And I'm like, okay, well, guess who's in charge of that? You are. And I wasn't trying to be right, but you see, it's okay. It's okay to talk about your business with the same love and joy that you talk about your friends and your family and your pets or your weekend out with your buddies, whatever. But somehow it became not okay. And this kind of makes me crazy. Cole knows it kind of makes me mad. A couple of martinis later, I really start get going, right, Cole? But only two. And it doesn't make any sense. You spend all your days inside this business. You hire gajillions of people. You build technology until your eyes bleed. You sell the living hell out of it. Yet, a lot of times, telling your own story about your business creates pain. I don't know if anybody here has that problem, but every other person I've ever met in my entire career has that problem. It just doesn't make any sense, but it starts with giving yourself permission. You know, and it's okay. There's no downside. Nobody gets mad at you when you tell how you started the business, even 15, 20 years later. They don't care. They like it. They'll root for you. And I am going to let go of that stick for a second because that's where all the love comes from. That's what drives Cole and I to try to help companies. But in the end, there's always an end. And may your company live happily ever after. If there's any questions, we'd love to hang out. I know I chewed up some of our time. And if you want to hang out a little longer, I think we parked another half hour to get backstage. But let me shut up. Stephen, back to you.